Guns are as American as apple pie, which would make it sound like they're on equal footing, but I gotta tell you, I've seen far more kids playing with toy guns than toy pies. That said, for both audiences, the more realistic the better. You want it to look real, you want it to feel real, you want it to sound so real. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Entertech. The history of toy guns in America goes back to the invention of, well, this thing. Mine's vintage. Pop culture has always had a love affair with guns because we love stories about good and evil, cops and robbers, war, alien robot fights, and there's no quicker way to introduce dramatic tension into a situation than to toss a gun into the mix. 63% of movies and television is just writers coming up with situations to have characters point guns at each other. Probably. In the 1950s, westerns were big business and kids had toy cowboy guns. In the 60s, it was all about rockets, space exploration and lasers and atomic disintegrators, not to mention all the World War II and police replicas. The cowboy guns didn't go away, mind you. The phasers and Tommy guns and snub-nosed revolvers just got added to the selection. Plastics made it easier to produce even greater quantities with greater selection. In the 70s, the proliferation of plastic arms swelled, and with each successive decade the toy industry grew, pop culture played a larger role, and by 1985, realistic modern toy gun technology reached its apex. No, not you, Megatron. Entertech was a brand of water guns produced by LJN Toys starting in 1985, featuring a high degree of realistic design, a battery-operated rapid-firing trigger mechanism, removable cartridges, and a 30-foot effective range. Market-shifting attributes that put the previous era of clear plastic, manually operated, water-firing sidearms to shame. Realism wasn't necessarily a new thing. Companies like Nichols, Hubley, and Marks made all kinds of cap guns back in the 50s and 60s that looked and felt like the real thing, and some even featured two-piece firing caps that produced smoke from the barrel. But the realism was the selling point. Kids loved to play guns, or war, or alien robot fight, or at the very least recreate the adventures of Han Solo, Snake Eyes, or whichever gun-toting hero was the flavor of the day. I spent hours on vacation at my grandparents' house sneaking up on imaginary assailants in the bedrooms and hallways, heroically diving over couches and leaping into the kitchen. Lots of tense moments, slow-motion fighting, trying to save the last imaginary bullet because only one of us was walking away from this, and while I still had plenty of ninja stars, I was a crack shot with a sidearm. Entertech sold that realism. They looked like real guns. They were just about the size and feel of a real gun. Obviously not the same kind of weight, but when filled with water, including the batteries and firing mechanism, certainly closer to the real thing than ever. The sound, alright, maybe not so real there. No one would ever mistake it for the sound of actual gunfire, but at least it was a noise coming out of the gun when the trigger was pulled, as opposed to the wet squirt of the previous era. The first batch of Entertech guns were all based on real firearms, including a rocket-propelled grenade that unfortunately didn't fire a water balloon or anything, it just shot water out of the tip of the rocket. There was an Uzi, a Beretta, the Centerfire, the Waterhawk, and an M16. Sales took off, and in the second wave of production, LJN licensed the Rambo name and Sylvester Stallone's likeness on the strength of the first Rambo sequel, Rambo First Blood Part 2, which hit theaters in 1985, and the Rambo animated series, which aired in 1986. The Rambo guns, of course, were the same as the regular guns, they just had Rambo's name on them, and they came with a red Rambo headband. Entertech Wave 2 also introduced water balloon grenades complete with detonator-style pump to arm them, and a shotgun, also with pump action, a brief glimpse into the future of water gun technology. Entertech expanded the toy gun market with the laser tag alternative called Photon in 1986. In 1987, they introduced a paintball-style game called Gotcha, which was also a Nintendo Entertainment System tie-in, and Zap-It water guns with disappearing ink. But public opinion about realistic guns marketed to children and the dangers they presented in the real world became too much to ignore. Some cities had already taken preemptive steps to ban the sale of realistic toy guns years before, and more were joining every day. Anything that even looked like a real gun had been illegal in New York City since the 1950s. As more toy guns were released into the market, more incidents of these guns being mistaken as real occurred, and the results were deadly. Entertech and other brands of realistic toy guns were being used to commit actual crimes. To address that, state and federal legislation was introduced to treat criminals who used toy guns in the commission of a crime as if they had used the actual gun. The toy gun industry made attempts to self-regulate, but those attempts were quickly made actual requirements, regulations by federal law. Toy guns of all types were required to have a blaze orange tip affixed to the end and, preferably, other bright orange markings that immediately drew a visual distinction between it and the real weapon it was mimicking, and preferably maybe even don't make them at all. Just 2 years into the brand in 1987, Entertech was attempting to move away from the realism that had put them on the map as they released some of their previous offerings in a slew of 80s neon colors. But the end was already in sight. Parents weren't buying as many toy guns, kids didn't want guns that looked like neon vomit. Not to mention that while refillable cartridges had been a revolutionary concept and added to the sense of realism and the play value, the drain on the batteries required a cash reload. And once the batteries were dead, it reduced the combat effectiveness of the weapon to 0. And in 1990, Laramie Toys introduced the Super Soaker, which solved every problem Entertech's guns had and improved on everything they were already doing well. They didn't look anything like real guns, more water capacity, greater effective firing range, way cheaper to produce with no electric or metal mechanical parts, no batteries required, no kids killed for carrying them in public, no banks robbed. After profits from LJN cratered due to the loss of Entertech sales, parent company MCA sold LJN along with the Entertech brand to Acclaim in 1990. Acclaim focused the LJN brand on video game production, ending toy manufacturing and retiring the Entertech brand. With Entertech, LJN Toys revolutionized the toy gun industry and water guns in particular. They delivered an unprecedented, unrivaled degree of realism in replica weapons intended for use as toys by kids, and in retrospect made a pretty strong case for why that was a particular area of focus that the industry no longer needed to explore. Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you to those who are. Share this video, and if you're in the position to help the channel grow, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy. Let us know down in the comments below, did you have any toy guns? I imagine most people are going to say yes to Super Soaker type water guns, but I'd be surprised if there were a lot of people who had toy guns that looked like guns. It's a pretty distinct line between generations. Got guns, got no guns. Cut.